Welcome to the Impactful Leadership Show. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. John Lennon once said, "A dream you dream alone is only a dream. A dream you dream together is reality." Join me as we connect dreams to reality by chatting with innovators from around Washington, D.C. Our show is proudly sponsored by the D.C. chapter of the Entrepreneurs Organization. This is the Impactful Leadership Show. Welcome to the Impactful Leadership Show. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. I'm the CEO of Blackburn Capital Advisors. Today's guest is the founder and CEO of Delve, a Washington-based competitive intelligence and risk advisory firm that helps highly scrutinized sectors anticipate and mitigate public affairs issues. He's been recognized by Politico as a policy ace and one of the best-known policy researchers in D.C. by the Daily Beast. He works directly with the White House, the State Department, major presidential campaigns, and national political organizations, and as a member of the Forbes Business Council and a leader in the Entrepreneurs Organization. Please welcome Jeff Berkowitz.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
It's great to have you here. It's nice to see you again.
Yeah. Always.
So my podcast is focused on leadership. And my favorite question to ask my guests is, Jeff, tell me about some misconceptions in leadership.
I think one of the biggest misconceptions in leadership is what I call the circle of competence. And I think a lot of folks work in what's the outer circle of competence of what they think they know, rather than the inner circle of competence, what they actually know. And that can lead to a huge amount of disagreements with staff and team members and clients about what's going on. It can mean that your assumption, what you thought you knew, was actually a flawed assumption. And I think, as a leader, you have to be willing to recognize what you really know and what you still need to learn.
That's very insightful. Digging a little bit deeper, talk to us about how a leader can recognize that. We've all run businesses and we are hard chargers, and you get to some point in your leadership path, your career path. When does that light bulb come on to say, you know what, I don't know everything?
That's a great question. I mean, so my career has been as a researcher, so my default has always been that I don't know, but I could probably find out. Mm-hmm. And actually, our motto, here at Delve is, what you don't know can hurt you. So we kind of start from that as a first principle. I like your call out to one of our core values, digging deeper. So I think but it's really important for leaders to realize that it's okay to not know. In fact, one of the most powerful things that you can do as a leader is ask questions, and to really dive in on, well, what do we know that's a fact? What do we think we know, but we haven't proven yet? I think there's the false attribution error that a lot of folks fall into, where we tend to, if we do something wrong or make a mistake, it's because of external factors. But with other people, we think it's some sort of internal factor of a flaw with them. They're just trying to cheat me, or they're just they're lazy or whatever. They deal with external factors too. So being able to know enough to step back and say, what do I actually know, and what are the possibilities, and how do I figure out what's really going on, is an important thing for a leader to be able to do.
And it sounds, Jeff, that you impose that on your team as well as part of the Delve culture. So talk to us about when a new member comes onto your team, or as your team is developing, how do you instill that mindset throughout your organization? Yeah.
So we're very intentional with our onboarding. In fact, most of our employees start in our associate training program. It's a 3-month program where they get trained how to do the kind of research we do through the lens of public affairs, and to really understand how do you collect, analyze, and then synthesize the information that's important to our clients. And before we dive into any of that, on the first day, the first conversation we have with them is around personality type. We have them do Myers-Briggs before they start, and we sit down, share so what resonated with you about what the test said about your personality type, what didn't make sense, we share about how we were, their manager, myself, whoever they're going to be working with, share as well. And we talk about, what are examples of where you were able to do some of your best work that you're most proud of, where are places where it was harder for you. So we really learn, how do people approach work? How do they, how are they successful? And really make sure that we're connecting and understanding who they are and how they operate, to avoid some of those misunderstandings down the road. It's only then that we start talking about what it is that we actually do, who we do it for, and all the rest of that. But in that first day introduction, we do talk about the circle of competence, and needing to be very humble about, there's what you think you know, and then there's what you actually know. And our goal at Delve is to keep expanding both of those circles wider.
Certainly. So talk to me about where that concept came up how did that come up for you? Was it something that you just woke up with one day and it's like, oh, the circle of competence and what you know and actually know, and walk us through that journey of discovery.
Yeah. So I read it in a book, and I'm afraid to say that I don't remember what book it was, that I stole it from. That's the problem with reading a lot of business books.
Yeah.
They all start stringing together. But I read it and it really resonated with me because, as researchers, we're constantly thinking about what else can we learn and know. But I think a lot of folks, they think they know something, so it must be true. And it causes a lot of challenges. We see it a lot of times with clients, who are convinced, if a client comes to us and they're convinced they already know what is true and who's behind, whatever public affairs issue they're having, or negative news stories or whatever. If we don't find, they're waiting for us to prove them true versus finding out just what the reality is. And it can make it much more difficult for them to then be able to deal with what the reality is. And if you're going to be successful in business, whether it's overcoming a public affairs challenge, it's, making sales and scaling the business, growing your team, you got to deal in reality, not the theoretical.
Certainly. Yeah. And I can imagine your clients that come to you, and even as you lead your team, right, you have that research bias, right? You've got an opinion or a hunch before you even get started. How do you handle that with a client if they come in and say, you know what, Jeff, this is what I believe and prove me right? And all of a sudden you want to do what's best for the client, and you also want to be hired again. And so talk to us about that balance.
So we just lay out, here's what we know, here's what we're able to confirm, here's what's in the public record, here's the information that's there, here are the gaps, here's ways we can close those gaps. They can, sometimes they appreciate that approach, sometimes they don't. But I think over the long term, we get a reputation of, folks know that if we say something is these are the facts and this is the reality, people know they can trust that, and they can go and make that case, whether it's with policymakers or other stakeholders. They don't have to have doubt. And I'd rather have that long-term trust and confidence and reputation than short-term assurances for one client.
Fair enough. So shifting the topic just slightly to decision making, for me, when I'm doing research or in discovery mode, it's usually in anticipation or hope to make a decision. At what point in time, if you've got an answer for this, would be wonderful, but at what point in time do you draw the line and you say, enough research, I got to make a decision with what I've got, or got to publish this to the client, or because you could kind of get into this never ending circle.
Yeah, there's always more research you can do. There's always more information you could have before you make a decision. You have to, and that's something I struggled with, with the firm. There's, needing some of our strategic advisors to kind of push me, like, you know enough. And so I think, you have to, I sort of look at it through two lenses. The first is, is the decision reversible? Right. Or is it a permanent, once we cross that Rubicon, it's gonna be very difficult or impossible to come back. Or is it something where we could forge ahead with a strategy without all the information, and as we go down that path, realize it doesn't make sense, we can, shift gears. Then you should try and make it sooner rather than later. And then the second lens is just, how about, am I at that 70 or 80% mark? You're probably never going to be at the 100% mark of what information. But I think, one of our other core values is work smart. You got to deliver things in a timely fashion to clients. So if you understand at the beginning, if you define, what's the purpose of this information? What is the decision I'm trying to make? The more you understand that, then you can figure out, well, what's the information that I need that really drives this decision? What are the key factors? And once you can figure out those and get that information, there's always going to be other information that can bring in nuances and details to the decision. But if you're addressing the objective, if you're answering the key factors, then you can make a decision with the information.
That's very helpful. That's very helpful. So, I gave a little bit of intro of your background and your business. Talk to me about your sort of ideal client, if there is such a thing. Like somebody listening to this listening to this podcast, curious about what you do or developing a relationship or something. Like, give us some background about Dell and what you specialize in.
So our clients are engaged in heavily regulated or highly scrutinized industries or policy areas, and they want to make sure they understand that full landscape of stakeholders that are going to engage in those policy issue debates that impact their business objectives. Because once you understand that landscape of stakeholders and who you can engage with and whose efforts are going to be, in opposition to your own, then you can form a strategy to achieve those business objectives with a minimum of delay and disruption. So we do a lot of work in the energy space, healthcare, life sciences is a big space as well, financial services, navigating trade and sanctions issues. We also do a fair amount of work with folks that find themselves in a reputational crisis, either of their own making or somebody else's, and help them find that path back to more calm waters for their brand and company.
Fantastic. So tell us how you got here. Like, go through the Jeff background. How did you end up from being born to doing what you're doing now?
Yeah. So I came to Washington and was engaged in politics, spent time in the campaign world and in government, had the opportunity to work on a number of presidential campaigns and campaigns at other high levels at some of the national party committees and organizations, and then served in the White House for President Bush and State Department. And at the White House, I ran the research operation. Our job was essentially to vet the potential political and reputational risks of everything that was going to go onto the president and vice president's calendar. Everything from what organizations was he recognizing, which individuals were staying on stage, who was greeting him at the airport, who was participating in the roundtable discussions or whatever other events. He's not flying to a factory to talk about how great the economy is, and then 2 weeks later they're announcing layoffs at the factory. Any of that kind of fun stuff. And so it gave me a great lens of how to understand what could be a potentially problematic associations. Then when I left my last position with the National Party Committee, I didn't really have a plan for what was next. But people kind of started calling and needing research, and more it was companies and associations, industry groups, and less of the campaign folks. And what I realized was the kind of information advantage we take for granted in politics and government and the sort of the political apparatus of government, to the extent that companies and industry groups recognized they needed that, there wasn't really anyone built to do it. So we sort of forged ahead, and about 4 or 5 years after we started taking clients' monies, I admitted I'd started a business. I sought help, and then when the therapy didn't work, I forged ahead to figure out what does it mean to have a business. I'd been in campaigns and government. I didn't know anything about business. Stumbled across the Entrepreneurs Organization and their accelerator program, which we went through, and then joined EO, and it really kind of helped solidify my understanding of how do you build a business that's sustainable. Right. A lot of us, at the firm came out of campaigns where you think in this election cycle mentality, right? You race to the end of the campaign and then everybody gets asleep for a few months before anyone wants to talk to you. As we like to say here at Dove, our campaign doesn't end, right? So we've got to find ways to be more sustainable in how we work, with each other and with our clients. And, it's been a fantastic journey.
I have to ask the question, which do you enjoy more, managing a business or doing the work, doing the political research work?
I probably would have given you a different answer, 10 years ago, but, now I think for me, I enjoy, I enjoy connecting with the clients and the potential clients and thinking about how do we sort of strategically grow more than doing the day-to-day work. I'm mostly out of the day-to-day work with our clients. We've an awesome research director and team managers and senior analysts, and they probably handle 85 to 90% of that stuff. I think that was one of our biggest challenges in our early days, was sort of like getting it to that point where I could grow enough to step back while having, and the team growing enough so that they had my confidence that I could. One of the biggest lessons I had to work on was, especially having done this sort of as a freelancer, maybe with some subcontractors for a number of years before launching the firm, is I had done all the dumb things you shouldn't do with a client and learn the hard way. And so I could see the failure points coming, and I had to learn to step back and let the managers learn those mistakes themselves and fail a few times so that they could then grow as I had, and see, oh, that didn't land the way I thought it would, and some of those other lessons. So I think they do a great job managing the team. I love seeing when we're doing good work with the clients and they appreciate it. But I really love getting out on the road, and we do a lot of, I do a lot of speaking and presentations to conferences and associations on political and reputational risks. I always encourage them to put me right before happy hour, because people usually need a drink after I'm done presenting on what's coming down the pike from Washington and state capitals for their industry. But it's fun to think about how to help businesses grow and scale and be successful in hitting their objectives without getting unfairly hindered by stakeholders that don't understand what they're really trying to do, or policymakers that don't really understand how commerce really happens in their industry.
So what's your number one tip? You're standing on stage, you're giving that presentation. The number one tip you give to your audience about, managing their risk profile.
The number one tip that I usually will give is, if you don't have an information advantage, your opponents do. Right? Knowledge is power. You're not, in this day and age, you're not going to stop the conversation from happening. You can only shape and guide it in a way that's positive for your company. And you've got to do that using a base of real and true information. The idea that you can spin and manipulate your way through this is no longer true, if it ever was. And so if you're going to engage in that conversation, you've got to make sure you're doing so with that information advantage.
Powerful. So my curiosity question, what was your biggest or favorite discovery during some research project that you were in? You came across some information, you're like, this is it, or it completely shattered your hypothesis. What's that? Yeah, I suspect you've got that story in your pocket.
Yeah, I have lots of those stories. Can't tell most of them. But I will say, one of my favorite things is early on we were working with a pharmaceutical company, and they were trying to bring a next generation drug to market that prevented rather than treated a very devastating chronic illness. And most of the patient advocacy groups, other stakeholders were very excited about this development, this prospect. But there was one group that was very vocally opposed, and it was throwing everything into confusion. And so they asked us to help them figure out, like, what's going on and how do we overcome this? And we dug into this group and figured out that the group, even though it presented itself as this nonprofit patient advocacy group, most of their funding came from providing clinical services for people that had the illness. Mm-hmm. So if you were to prevent people from having the illness, you were going to dry out their source of funding. And providing that information, to the company to allow them to educate other patient advocacy group, educate regulators about the real motive behind their objections, allowed them to get that drug to market. It's been on the market for about 4 years now, I think, and it's really revolutionized and empowered communities not to have to worry about this illness and to be able to prevent it from happening.
That's wonderful. It's a great story. So Jeff, going back to the running a business topic, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself, back in the early days when you were just thinking about either starting a business or wasn't even on your plate? Like, looking back again through your experience, or you're talking to a young entrepreneur or a student, what advice around business leadership would you give them?
That's a great question. I think about that a lot now because, I've observed, and I'm sure in your work, you see this a lot, those second and third time entrepreneurs, when they're on their second, third, fourth company, they move so much faster and so much more successful. And it's because they figured it all out the hard way the first time. And I love what we're doing. So there's not going to be a second business anytime soon. But I've been thinking a lot lately of what, there's a lot of lessons we could learn so how do we sort of reinvent things now? And one of the key things I think is knowing your financials is really empowering. Understanding that cash flow. Early on, I was very reticent to make some of the hiring decisions and in things that we could invest in for the business, that because I was worried about short-term cash. But if I had better understanding of what our cash flow looked like over a longer period of time, I would have had better confidence to make those decisions. And then I would also say the other big thing is really think about not just where your organization chart needs to be today, but where does it need to be in 2 or 3 years, and make sure you're putting people in place that can be in that org chart 2 or 3 years from now. Because otherwise you end up with a team that can't get you to that next level.
That's very well put. Yeah, I find that, the second and third businesses, there's just a less emotion tied to it. The first one, and that was my story too. My previous company, EEI Communications, I was determined to make this thing successful. And it got us into all kinds of no places that I can't talk about on a recorded microphone. So Jeff, tell us how we can find you. So an audience member, podcast listeners looking to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Yeah. visit our website. We're delvedc.com. You can see how I spell Delve right behind me. You sign up for we do a bi-weekly newsletter on some of the political reputational issues we see. We also have more specific industry specific analyses that we put out weekly in the energy and life sciences industries. So if you sign up for the public newsletter and comment that you're interested in the industry ones, we can get you added to those as well.
Awesome. So my last question, any favorite business books or leadership books you're reading right now?
This summer on vacation, I reread Patrick Lencioni's most recent book. I love all of his books, but his most recent book, The Motive. I think if you are a leader in a business or even in a nonprofit organization, it's going to really kick your butt. Every time I read it, it kicks me too, because he really talks about a lot of society really trains us to view leadership as a reward, right? You move up and become a manager and director because you've earned it and you've put in your time. But leadership should really be responsibility based, not reward based. And it should be because you have a commitment to really help other people grow. His argument is servant leadership is redundant. That's an aspiration that I think we all try and live up to. But it's always a reminder that you should be showing up for work as a leader because of how you can help the people you're leading, not because you've earned it.
That's very powerful and a great comment to end on. So Jeff, it's been great having you on the show. Appreciate your time and all the influence you're having out there. And so thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And thanks for all of what you do to help entrepreneurs. I know your leadership in entrepreneur organization very well and in the community. So it's great to spend some time chatting with you.
Yeah, it's a passion of mine. Thanks again, Jeff. And that's a wrap, my friends. Thank you for spending your time with me. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at impactfulleadershipshow.com. One last food for thought: walk on with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone.